1857 Georgia, a widow named Eleanor Creswell wasn't just running a plantation. She was running an investigation. Hidden beneath her fields lay a dark truth. 13 men buried, each connected to the South's most powerful families. She wasn't seeking justice through courts. She was using shame, secrets, and death. What she uncovered could have destroyed an empire. This isn't fiction. This is a true crime historical mystery buried in blood and silence. So let's step into the story. A chilling true crime, a haunting historical mystery, and the twisted mind of a woman who believed murder could bring justice. In April of 1857, a traveling cotton broker from Charleston visited a modest Georgia estate called Moss Creek to inspect its plantation records. While reviewing the ledgers, he noticed something unusual. Over the course of 15 years, 23 young enslaved men had been sold from that single plantation, all for unusually high prices, and each one was marked with the same phrase, "Prime condition certified." The broker didn't realize it then, but that simple note would later expose one of the darkest secrets buried in Georgia's history. Moss Creek was a mid-sized cotton plantation spread across 370 acres of Georgia clay, set between the Oconee River and the old road that linked Milledgeville to Augusta. Unlike the grand estates of the time, Moss Creek had no white columns, no grand gardens, and no lavish parties. It was quiet, efficient, and managed by a woman named Eleanor Creswell. Eleanor had inherited Moss Creek in 1840 when her husband, Thomas Creswell, died suddenly from what doctors recorded as apoplexy. She was 31, childless, and expected to sell the property and return to her family in Savannah. But she didn't. Instead, she dismissed her husband's overseer, took control of the land herself, and within a year, turned Moss Creek into one of the most profitable plantations in the county. She called her method strategic acquisition and disposal. While most planters built stable communities of enslaved families, Eleanor treated people as investments. She bought young, strong men, usually aged 18 to 25, kept them for about a year, and then sold them to buyers in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana for large profits. The few women who worked at Moss Creek were older and unable to have children. Eleanor wanted no families, no children, and no distractions, only results and complete control. By the mid-1840s, she was known as a capable and calculating businesswoman. Male planters who once refused to trade with her eventually respected her knowledge of cotton markets and soil management. She didn't attend church or social events and rarely entertained visitors. When people questioned her reclusive habits, she would say, "Widowhood has its freedoms." What no one knew was that Eleanor kept 3 different sets of books. The first was for show, standard plantation accounts that could be inspected by tax officials. The second recorded the true profits, much higher than the public numbers. The third was hidden in a locked iron box beneath the floor of her bedroom. That private ledger was written in a secret code she had created herself, a cipher inspired by shipping logs she'd learned from her father's business. Inside it, she wrote everything: names, ages, and detailed physical descriptions of each man she bought and sold. She even noted traits like skin tone, jawline, and eye color under different lighting. It wasn't just accounting. It was a personal record for something much larger. At Moss Creek, the daily routine was precise. Every time a new man arrived, Eleanor kept him isolated for a week. The other enslaved people knew why, but never spoke of it. On the 7th night, she would call the man to the main house. The servants observed her patterns. She always bathed first, always wore the same plain gray dress, and kept a lamp burning in her bedroom long past midnight. The next morning, the man would emerge quiet and withdrawn, while Eleanor spent hours writing in her study beside the open iron box. The first disappearance linked to Moss Creek occurred in 1843. A man named Samuel, sold to a buyer in Alabama for what $800, never reached his destination. When questioned, Eleanor presented receipts and letters proving the sale and expressed polite concern. The matter was dropped. 6 months later, another man named Isaac disappeared in the same way. By 1847, 5 men sold from Moss Creek had vanished without a trace. Each time, Eleanor had documentation ready, and because slave escapes were common, no one investigated further. But none of those men had ever left Georgia. Their bodies were buried in a rocky corner of the property where Eleanor had forbidden plowing, claiming she intended to plant an orchard there. The orchard never appeared, But the graves remained hidden. Eleanor's killings followed a strict routine. A few days before selling a man, she would invite him to the barn at night. The barn was unusually large for a plantation of its size, with a small locked room in the back. There, she'd offer him whiskey laced with laudanum, enough to make him drowsy, not unconscious. While he drifted in and out, she would show him her secret ledger, explaining that his name and physical features were part of a larger record, one she intended to use to destroy the families who built their wealth on human lives. Then she would call for her accomplice, the only person who knew everything about what she was doing. That accomplice was her son, Henry Creswell. Officially, Eleanor never had children. But in 1829, 7 years before her marriage, she had secretly given birth to a boy in Savannah. The child's father was a man her family would never accept, an enslaved dock worker who had caught Eleanor's attention during a summer when she was young and defiant. When her pregnancy was discovered, her father sold the man to a Louisiana sugar plantation, where he later died from overwork. Eleanor's newborn son was sent north to Philadelphia, raised by her widowed aunt under a new name Eleanor never forgot. The loss hardened her and turned her grief into a plan for vengeance against the Southern elite who destroyed her life and countless others. After her husband's death in 1840, she summoned her son back to Georgia. In 1841, he arrived at Moss Creek posing as Henry Lell, a merchant from Philadelphia dealing in farm equipment. No one questioned his presence. To outsiders, he was a visiting tradesman. To Eleanor, he was the living link to the man she had lost, and her partner in the secret mission she had been building for years. Together, mother and son continued their grim work at Moss Creek, selecting victims, recording every detail, and burying their bodies beneath the Georgia soil. Each entry in Eleanor's coded book served as both evidence and retribution, a document of truth against the society she despised. Decades later, when a Charleston broker stumbled upon those ledgers, the terrible reality of Moss Creek began to surface, a truth that the powerful tried to erase, but one that refused to stay buried. Have you ever heard of someone who turned justice into something darker, something monstrous? Because that's exactly what happened on a quiet Georgia plantation called Moss Creek. Let's go back. Mid-1800s, a widow named Eleanor Creswell managed her estate with the precision of a businesswoman and the coldness of a surgeon. On paper, she was respectable, efficient, even admirable. But beneath that calm exterior, she was building a secret empire. Eleanor's partner, Henry, often traveled between towns, Milledgeville, Augusta, Savannah. To everyone else, he was just a businessman handling plantation accounts. But when he came to Moss Creek, he didn't just stay overnight. He had his own room in the main house. He and Eleanor would lock themselves away for hours, reviewing ledgers written in strange codes, planning their next purchases. No one in the county suspected that behind her stables lay a locked barn, and under that barn, a hidden cellar, a place for tasks that demanded absolute privacy. Eleanor wasn't buying slaves to work the fields. She was choosing them, selecting them, with an obsession that went far beyond business. She'd travel to markets in Savannah or Augusta, studying young men like a collector studies rare art. But she wasn't checking for strength or age. She was looking at faces, eyes, jawlines, skin tone, freckles, details that most people would never notice. But she did. Why? Because Eleanor had spent years studying Georgia's most powerful families. She knew their hidden scandals, the white planters who had secretly fathered children with enslaved women, the pure family lines that weren't so pure after all. And when she found a young man whose face resembled one of those families, the same Caldwell eyes, the same Pemberton jaw, she bought him immediately. To her, he wasn't just another slave. He was evidence. You see, Eleanor wasn't planning to free anyone. She was documenting her victims, their features, skin color under different light, even the shape of their ears, recording everything in that coded ledger. Proof of the South's greatest hypocrisy. Men who built their fortunes on racial purity, yet couldn't resist crossing the line themselves. But living proof could talk back. It could run. It could deny the truth. So Eleanor made sure her evidence could never be questioned. 13 men, buried in the unworked corner of Moss Creek by 1850. 13 entries in her ledger. 13 family names marked for destruction. But then the world began to change. Tensions between the North and South were boiling. The Compromise of 1850 had bought time, but not peace. and Eleanor started to worry. Would her grand plan survive the coming storm? Or would war erase everything before she could strike? Then came the letter, and everything changed. In the summer of 1856, a message arrived from Boston. It was signed Daniel Harrington, a lawyer and abolitionist writer for The Liberator. He'd heard of irregularities at Moss Creek. He wanted to visit. Ask questions. See for himself. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, calm, expressionless. Then she showed it to Henry. He asked, "Do we stop?" Her answer? A chilling smile. "No, we invite him." When Harrington arrived that September, he looked every bit the Northerner. Thin, pale, out of place in the Georgia heat. Eleanor welcomed him with perfect grace, showing him her spotless parlor and modest furnishings. He asked direct questions. Why only male slaves? Why so many disappearances? Eleanor answered each one with calm precision. Every sale documented, every disappearance just an escapee. Nothing illegal, nothing cruel. She was perfect, too perfect. So when Harrington asked to stay nearby and interview others, she didn't stop him. She only said, "You're free to waste your time, but be warned. People here protect their own." It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but the message was clear. For the next few days, Harrington asked questions around Milledgeville. Everyone said the same thing. Mrs. Creswell? Honest. Efficient. Maybe strange but harmless. Then, one night everything changed. An elderly woman came to his boarding house. She said her name was Ruth, a house servant at Moss Creek, and she had something to tell him. She spoke in whispers, terrified but determined. She told him about the men Eleanor bought, about what happened on the 7th night after they arrived, about the locked room in the barn and the sounds that came from it long after midnight. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "She ain't right," Ruth said. "Been cold since her husband died. Maybe before. Something evil in that woman. Those young men, they don't all get sold away. Some just vanish." Harrington leaned forward. "Do you know what happens to them?" Ruth hesitated. "No one says it. But there's land she don't let no one touch. Says she'll plant trees there someday, but I seen her digging there, filling it back up." Then Ruth mentioned a man, Mr. Lell, the equipment salesman who stayed for days. Always talking, planning with Eleanor. But no one ever saw new machinery arrive? Ruth stood suddenly. "I shouldn't have come. If she finds out I talked to you..." And with that, she left. That night, Daniel Harrington sat alone in the dark, her words echoing in his head. If Ruth was telling the truth, then Moss Creek wasn't just hiding cruelty. It was hiding something much worse, and what he uncovered next would expose one of the darkest secrets in Georgia's history. What if a woman's fight for justice became something far darker than revenge? Because at Moss Creek Plantation, one widow turned truth itself into a weapon, and the closer someone got to uncovering it, the deeper her secret went. Daniel Harrington, the Boston lawyer, couldn't shake the feeling. Eleanor Creswell was hiding something criminal. But what exactly? And how could he ever prove it? The next morning, without warning, he saddled a horse and rode straight back to Moss Creek. No letters. No notice. He wanted to catch her off guard. But when he arrived, Eleanor was outside, calm as ever, supervising the loading of cotton bales like any other day. "Mr. Harrington," she said, brushing the dust from her apron. "Back so soon? I thought your investigation was over." He didn't waste words. "I'd like to see your entire property," he said. "All of it, including the outbuildings." Her smile faltered for half a heartbeat. Then back to polite charm. "Of course," she said sweetly. "Though I'm not sure what you expect to find." The tour began. The cotton gin, the smokehouse, the cabins. Everything appeared ordinary, efficient, modest, exactly what you'd expect from a small plantation. Then they reached the barn. Eleanor swung open the doors. Sunlight poured across stacks of hay, plows, and tools. "This is where we keep the equipment," she said. "And the back room?" Harrington asked, pointing. "Storage," she replied smoothly. "Old tools, broken plows, nothing of interest. I'd like to see it." For a second, her eyes hardened. Not fear, calculation. Then she reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a small key, and unlocked the door. Inside, dust, cobwebs, rusted metal. It looked untouched for years. Harrington walked slowly, scanning every corner. No blood, no fresh dirt, no signs of struggle, just the stale emptiness of an old shed. Eleanor leaned against the doorway, watching him. Satisfied? Frustration burned in his chest. Ruth's story had seemed believable, but there was nothing here. No proof, no crime, just suspicion. He left the barn empty-handed, but as they walked back toward the house, something caught his eye. The ground near the barn, uneven, like it had been dug up and filled again. He remembered Ruth's whisper. She's been digging out back. That section there, he said, pointing toward a rocky patch beyond the fence. Why haven't you developed it? Poor soil, Eleanor said instantly. Too rocky for cotton. I plan to plant an orchard there someday. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Harrington nodded, but his gut told him the truth lay somewhere beneath that field. He left Moss Creek that day more uncertain than ever. He didn't know that the storage room he'd inspected was nothing but a stage, a performance. The real room lay beneath it. A trapdoor, hidden under barrels and hay, leading to a cellar only Eleanor and Henry ever entered. Down there were the tools Ruth had heard at night, and 13 wooden boxes, each marked with a number, each holding records and remains of the men Eleanor had buried in that orchard. For another week, Harrington scoured Georgia for proof. He interviewed merchants, doctors, planters, anyone connected to Moss Creek. Everyone said the same thing. Eleanor Creswell was unusual, yes, but honest. Her records were clean. Her sales were legal. No one could prove a thing. And Ruth's testimony? Coming from an enslaved woman with no physical evidence, it would never stand. Defeated, Harrington returned to Boston in early October. He wrote a short article for The Liberator outlining his suspicions. It landed on page 7, buried between columns of other Southern horrors. Barely anyone read it. Within weeks, the story was forgotten. But Eleanor didn't forget. That article, his visit, had exposed a flaw in her system. Someone had talked. Ruth had talked. And now Eleanor knew her secret wasn't as safe as she'd believed. She had to move faster. The night she learned Harrington had left Georgia, Eleanor summoned Ruth to the main house. The old woman entered trembling. She knew why she'd been called. Eleanor poured her a glass of water. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. You spoke to the lawyer, she said. It wasn't a question. Ruth's hands shook. Mrs. I didn't mean, I'm not going to punish you, Eleanor interrupted softly. I understand. You're scared. You've seen things you can't explain. She leaned closer. Her tone hardened. But I need you to listen carefully. What I'm doing here, it's not madness. It's not cruelty. It's justice. She stood, crossed to her study, and returned with an iron box. Inside, ledgers filled with codes, drawings, and measurements. Every man I've brought here, she said, was chosen for a reason. Each one carries blood from the most powerful families in Georgia. Blood that proves those men, those senators, those planters, are liars, hypocrites. She flipped open a page, revealing sketches of faces. Look here, Ruth, this man, Isaac, his eyes, gray-green, just like Senator Caldwell's. Isaac was his grandson. Born from a slave woman the senator's father raped 40 years ago. And he's not the only one. Ruth's voice cracked. You killed them. I preserved them, Eleanor said coldly. Living men can disappear, but the dead can't lie. Their bones will testify long after I'm gone. Ruth whispered. That's murder. What's murder? Eleanor snapped. Is the world that forced me to do this. A world where white men breed with women they own, deny their own children, and still dare to call themselves pure. I'm not the monster here. I'm the reckoning. Then Ruth asked the question that made Eleanor's eyes soften for the first time. What about Mr. Lell? Who is he? Eleanor smiled faintly. He's my son, she said. Mine and the child of a man my father once owned. That's why I fight, because my boy lives in a world that would destroy him for who he is. A world that deserves to burn. Ruth's heart sank. This wasn't madness. It was something colder, calculated. A decades-long crusade disguised as righteousness. What will you do with all of this? Ruth asked quietly. Soon, Eleanor said. When war comes, and it will come, I'll send everything north and south. Names, records, evidence, proof that will tear the South apart. They'll never be able to hide from what they've done. She locked the iron box and looked Ruth dead in the eyes. But you must stay silent. If you speak again, you'll destroy everything I've built. Ruth nodded slowly, her stomach twisting with guilt and terror. She understood, but it didn't make it right. 13 men were already dead, and Eleanor was planning for more. In the months that followed, Eleanor worked faster. 3 more young men arrived between October 1856 and March 1857, each selected with even greater precision. Henry visited constantly, telling friends he was moving south for business. In truth, he and his mother were finalizing their evidence. He made copies of her ledgers, translating them into plain English, and hiding them in vaults across the South and North, Savannah, Charleston, Pennsylvania, just in case something happened to them. The cellar beneath. The barn was now a laboratory. Henry, who had once studied medicine, handled the anatomical work, sketches, measurements, hair samples, sometimes bones. By spring of 1857, Eleanor's archive connected 17 of Georgia's most powerful families. Senators, judges, planters, merchants, all tied by blood to the people they enslaved. And the widow of Moss Creek wasn't finished yet. 17 men, each one connected by blood to Georgia's most powerful families. Men whose very existence proved that pure bloodlines were nothing but a lie. And one woman who was determined to expose them all no matter the cost. But before she could finish her work, fate intervened, and everything began to crumble. By early 1857, Eleanor Creswell believed she was close to achieving her life's purpose. She'd spent 16 years gathering evidence, tracking bloodlines, recording faces, and connecting names to reveal the ugliest truth behind the South's most respected families. She wasn't just running a plantation. She was running a quiet war, and she was nearly ready to strike. But she needed more families, more proof. 25, she calculated, would be enough to bring the entire system down in one devastating scandal. She was so close, until one man noticed something he shouldn't have. In April 1857, a Charleston cotton broker named William Thorne came to Moss Creek to inspect Eleanor's records. He was no ordinary businessman. Thorne was meticulous, the kind who saw what others ignored, and in her ledgers he spotted a pattern. Every male slave Eleanor sold was listed at unusually high prices. Everyone marked prime condition, certified, and some of those men simply vanished from the records after being sold. Thorne wasn't suspicious at first. He just thought it strange, something worth asking about. But when he casually mentioned it, Eleanor's reaction told him everything. For just a second, her mask slipped. He saw fear. That was enough. Thorne left Moss Creek that day intending to dig deeper, to ask questions, to verify her records, and that was the mistake that sealed his fate. The moment Thorne's carriage disappeared down the road, Eleanor sent for Henry. They met that night, the air in her study thick with dread. "He's going to find out," she whispered. "He'll ask questions, and when he does, everything we've built will collapse." Henry, ever the voice of reason, said, "Then we stop. We have enough, 17 families. We release it now." But Eleanor shook her head. 17 isn't enough. They'll dismiss it, discredit it. We need more, enough to burn it all down. Then her trembling stopped. Her voice turned cold. "We can't let Thorne talk." Henry froze. "You mean—" "Yes," she said quietly. "We removed the problem." Thorne was staying in Milledgeville, taking his usual evening walk along the river road. He didn't know someone was following him. A man dressed like a runaway slave. Had low hands shaking. When Thorne turned, the figure struck. Witnesses later said they heard one gunshot. Then silence. The next morning, the papers told the story. Respected Charleston broker killed in robbery. Authorities blamed an escaped slave. A manhunt followed. Every nearby plantation was searched, but no one was missing, and no one ever found the killer because the murderer hadn't run away. He had simply gone home to Moss Creek, where he washed the blood from his hands and resumed his life as Henry Lowell, merchant from Philadelphia, Eleanor's own son. Thorne's death gave Eleanor time, but at a terrible cost. For the first time, she'd killed not as part of her mission, but to protect it. And something in her broke that night. Henry felt it too. He grew quiet, withdrawn. The certainty that had driven them for 16 years began to rot from the inside. What began as a crusade for justice had become a machine for murder. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Georgia burned, records lost, plantations destroyed, power overturned. Eleanor's secret world fell apart before she could reveal it. She died in 1863, of pneumonia, not punishment. Her precious archive stayed locked beneath her floorboards, unread, unseen. Henry vanished a year later. Some said he fled north. Others believed the war swallowed him. When Moss Creek was abandoned in 1865, no one knew what horrors lay beneath it. 37 years passed. In 1902, a developer bought the land to build a school. During excavation, workers unearthed skeletons, first one, then several, 16 bodies in shallow graves. Alongside them, small wooden boxes filled with sketches, hair samples, and precise measurements. The discovery sent shockwaves through Georgia. Who were they? Why were they buried here? But no one could answer. Eleanor had been dead for decades. Her records, coded, impossible to read, were boxed up and forgotten, until 1957. A graduate student stumbled upon the box in a courthouse basement. He spent 2 years cracking the cipher, and what he found was chilling. Eleanor's ledgers detailed connections between 17 enslaved men and Georgia's elite white families. Each man had been chosen for his bloodline, each one killed so their bodies could one day prove the hypocrisy of the South's ruling class. Her so-called evidence was undeniable, her methods unforgivable. When the student published his findings in 1959, academics were stunned, but the world had moved on. The families were gone. The outrage had nowhere to go. Eleanor had been right about the truth, but her truth came 100 years too late. Today, Moss Creek is gone. A shopping center stands where the plantation once did. Small sign marks the spot, nothing more. Beneath the asphalt lie the remains of men who died for a cause that never came to be. Eleanor's ledgers still exist, locked away in an archive in Savannah, fully translated, publicly available. Yet almost no one ever looks. Her life's work, her dark masterpiece, is now a forgotten file in a forgotten drawer. Maybe that's the cruelest twist of all. Eleanor wanted to force the world to face its sins. Instead, the world forgot hers, and everyone else's. So what do you think? Was Eleanor fighting injustice with the only weapons she had? Or did her war against evil turn her into something even darker? Let me know in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, or made you question how far justice should go, hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves true historical mysteries, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because next time, we're uncovering another secret history you were never meant to hear.